Hello, Dr. Sater here again. We should get a start on what this study of philosophy is all about. What is philosophy? Why is it so important? Why are we so interested in what it is to reason, what it is to reflect on ourselves, what it is to reflect on human nature, and what it is to reflect on the universe around us. This video was intended just to give us a brief overview to begin our studies of philosophy. This is not intended to replace the lecture notes that I've already placed online for you, nor is it intended to replace the assigned reading, that chapter 15 from Russell's What is Philosophy? Of course, the well-known etymology of the word philosophy comes from the Greek words philos sophia, love of wisdom. Now, in a certain sense, it's a trivial bit of information about what philosophy is. On the other hand, there is an important descriptive element to this etymology as well, in the sense that a good part of philosophy is the exploration and revelations of wisdom. What is it to be wise? How can we understand ourselves in the world around us so that we can lead better lives, so that we can be better people? That, in the end, is really what the function of philosophy serves. A couple of other definitions of philosophy that I've found to be at least somewhat serviceable. The attempt to provide for oneself an outlook on life based on the discovery of broad fundamental principles. An attempt to understand by rational inquiry what human understanding and life is all about. This philosophy is dedicated to understanding us, the rational creature. What is the nature of our existence, this reflective existence that demands that we consider who we are, what we are, and where we are? What is the fundamental nature of our material and mental existence? One of the issues that we will consider this semester is our dual nature as both material and intellectual beings. What does this existence demand of us? If we are to consider ourselves virtuous persons, how do we become virtuous persons? What is it to be a virtuous person? And is that dependent on the correct understanding of our nature? Philosophy approaches these kinds of questions through rational reflection by formal standards of reasoning. And indeed, this is why in weeks 2 and 3, we will dedicate ourselves to just a very brief account of the expectations for good critical thinking, as philosophy in its most robust form is the bastion of good critical thinking. As we'll talk about next week, you can't do philosophy if you are unwilling to abide by certain rules of basic reasoning to deliver our conclusions. Our goal, of course, is that comprehensive view of the universe and our place in it, based on our understanding of fundamental rational concepts, the concepts that engage our reasoning, our understanding of ourselves and place. We can identify two roles of philosophy. The first role, and that which we will focus most exclusively on this semester, is that of the analytic approach, the careful appraisal of an understanding of these fundamental concepts. We will first and foremost be engaged in analysis. And frequently, when I ask you to expand on a certain concept or your understanding of a certain concept, I will ask you to provide further analysis. But then philosophy, of course, does have its constructive element as well. That is, what do we do with the understanding provided by this philosophical analysis? And of course, the goal is the construction of a comprehensive view of ourselves and the universe around us that will allow us to live that virtuous life. This course approaches the subject of philosophy historically. And we can identify four major periods of philosophy that we will move through in order to understand the basic philosophical canon that has had such an influence on Western intellectual engagement. That first period that we often refer to as ancient or classical philosophy, roughly 600 to 700, 600 BC to 700 AD, or BCE to CE. This is the period most remarkably including Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. We will take a brief foray into the medieval period of philosophy known as scholastic philosophy, focusing most prominently on the work of St. Thomas Aquinas. We will spend more time on that Enlightenment period of philosophy known as modern philosophy, with its focus on epistemology and the works of Descartes, Hume, and Kant. And then we will end the semester exploring some contemporary and postmodern philosophies. In ancient philosophy, characterized by the work of various Greek thinkers, the fundamental questions that were pursued were those of metaphysics and virtue. That is, how can we understand the nature of ourselves and reality in such a way as to deliver some conclusions about what it is to live a virtuous life? The various influence during this period of history included the expansion of technology and trade and the exchange of ideas that accompanies this expansion. The expansion of a leisure class, the establishment of an aristocratic class that allowed for the time and study to ponder these larger conceptual issues. Mathematics is also developed during this time, a development that Plato himself makes a great deal of use. During this period, we get two major views of reality. We get that of formal idealism, characterized by some of the so-called pre-Socratic philosophers, picked up again by Socrates, and influenced the work of Plato. This was characteristic of a view that our first and most important understanding of ourselves and the world must begin with conceptualizations and their demands. And then there's the radical realism, often characterized in Aristotelian philosophy, some of which was inherited from the pre-Socratic philosophers like Heraclitus. This is a philosophy that relies much more on natural observation, the beginnings of natural science, formal logic, and epistemology, and finally ethics. This diversion between Plato and Aristotle has set the tone for all philosophy since. And as we move through the various periods and the various philosophers, we will see that in the end, in each case, we return to these competing views of the metaphysical understanding of ourselves and the universe. The scholastic period of philosophy, associated with that of medieval Europe, was dominated by the development of Christian church doctrine, sometimes known as scholasticism. And most importantly for our purposes, the application of ancient Greek philosophy to making sense of and making church doctrine consistent and intellectually satisfying. And we will look at primarily Aquinas and his Summa Theologica, but we will also allude to some of Anselm's work from his Proslogion and some to Augustine's Confessions, although Augustine does predate the scholastic period of philosophy. His influence on early church doctrine cannot be overestimated. And we get to the modern period of philosophy, the age of science, Renaissance, and the Enlightenment. It is in the modern period where we see a not so subtle shift in the focus of philosophical study. Whereas in both the ancient and scholastic periods of philosophy, the focus remained on metaphysics. In modern philosophy, we now see a focus far more on epistemology, that is, the study of knowledge. And we'll talk about this much more as to why this occurred and why it's such a continuing importance to the practice and study of philosophy. Of the many influences on modern philosophy during the Enlightenment period, we can isolate the scientific advances from early astronomers such as Kepler and Galileo, and of course the reforms of the Christian Catholic Church by luminaries such as, and most importantly, Martin Luther. The major epistemic philosophies of this period: Descartes' rationalism, that is, an explanation of knowledge in which reason plays the central role, reason and conceptualization, intuitions of the mind, as Descartes refers to them in one reading, as being responsible for what it is to know. Then in response to rationalism, we get the British empiricists, primarily Locke's Essay Concerning Human Understanding, followed later by Hume's Inquiries into Human Understanding. And we will focus most prominently on the philosophy, the and epistemology of Hume, as Hume is considered to be the philosopher that made empiricism the robust and consistent philosophy as understood today. Empiricism is that epistemology that explains knowledge, what it is to know, by reference first and foremost to the activities of the senses that provide the foundations and substance of perception. The final philosopher of the modern period that we will focus on is that of Kant. Kant takes these two disparate epistemologies of rationalism and empiricism and brings them together in an attempt to make sense of the insights from both epistemologies to create his own formalist epistemology or explanation of knowledge. The contemporary period of philosophy is characterized by a fragmentation, as if you will, of the various kinds of intellectual studies. This is where we begin to see various intellectual studies stand on their own, separate from philosophy, where philosophy begins to focus far more narrowly on conceptual questions of reality, existence, and truth, and allow the natural sciences and the social sciences and other intellectual studies to stand on their own. The major philosophies of today can be characterized as analytic philosophy, those philosophies that focus on language, mind, science, logic, etc. And then the continental philosophies, often associated with existentialism and phenomenalism. There's also a resurgence of work in pragmatist philosophy, most associated with American philosophers Peirce and Dewey. The significance of philosophical study cannot be overestimated. Those who don't have the opportunity to study philosophy, in the end, at least from my perspective, lead a superficial, perhaps even depleted life, in the sense that they don't have the opportunity to engage in the kind of intellectual exploration that philosophers over the centuries have provided us for understanding who we are and our place in the world and the kinds of questions that should motivate us, that should give us a sense of self and awareness. I hope that you will enjoy our study of philosophy this semester. I promise that if you will engage in this intellectual exploration of ideas, that you won't be disappointed. And indeed, you'll have a foundation of intellectual engagement that will serve you in good stead in the rest of your life. Well, in the rest of your intellectual life. Good luck, and we'll see you in the next video.